Good evening and welcome. I'm Jennifer Rutland of the Poetry and Literature Center. Before we begin, I have a couple of announcements. Mr. Phil Wiseman is our sign language interpreter this evening. Does any of you require his services? Thank you. Second, there will be a reception next door following this program. Next door this way. Please allow tonight's reader and tonight's introducer to get to the reception before you approach them. The party is for them, after all. Tonight's program, the Poetry Center's African American History Month event was one which Nancy Galbraith, recently retired head of the Poetry Center, very much wanted to have here, having been extremely impressed by Mr. Jones's first collection of short stories. And as a longtime admirer of Ms. Kendrick and her work, Nancy felt that inviting her to introduce Mr. Jones would be a special treat for us all. A renowned poet and an eminent teacher, Dolores Kendrick is a graduate of Dunbar High School here in Washington. She attended Minor Teachers College and Georgetown University here as well, and did graduate study at the University of Mexico. She has taught in Honolulu, Barcelona, and Shanghai, in addition to colleges and universities closer to home. And for the last 21 years, she has been on the faculty of Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, where she was awarded the Vera J. Hines Professorship in 1990. Her collections of poetry are Through the Ceiling, Now is the Time to Praise, and the prize-winning The Women of Plums, a critically acclaimed collection of what Ms. Kendrick describes as poems in the voices of slave women, published in 1990 by William Morrow. A theater production of The Women of Plums opened to rave reviews in Cleveland, Ohio last month. Her many other awards and honors include a Fulbright Fellowship, a National Endowment for the Arts Award, and the 1990 Anisfield Wolf Award for The Women of Plums, which was also named the New York Public Library Best Book for Teenagers in 1991. Ms. Kendrick is a longtime friend of the library, and her most recent appearance in our literary series was 2 years ago when she read from The Women of Plums. We are delighted to welcome her back tonight, Dolores Kendrick.
Edward P. Jones and I have something in common. We were both raised, or reared, as our elders would have it, in Washington. We both have more than a passing relationship with Holy Cross College in Worcester, Massachusetts. He as a student, I as a poet in residence and lecturer. And finally, we share the same publisher, William Morrow and Company. But we have something else in common. A love for this city with all its foibles, pretenses, and disguises, knowing how it protests, how it abandons, and through it all, how it grows on you. To quote Mr. Jones from a recent interview from City Paper, I was always struck by the fact that the rest of the world has all these ideas of what Washington is all about. And even on Sunday mornings, you get up and there's David Brinkley and his little segment of Friends talking about this town and how this town is abuzz with such and such. But hell, the majority of people are out in church somewhere. They're not thinking about things that happen on Capitol Hill or in the White House. They're going about their lives, and they couldn't care less. For them, and for a lot of people sitting around reading and watching television on Sunday morning, David Brinkley and his friends, that's all they know. But there's a whole different world out there. Mr. Jones writes about that world. I'm struck by the poignancy in his writing, the authenticity, and the humor. In The Girl Who Raised Pigeons, there is an eloquent note because sometimes his language sounds something like the blues. Quote, "But the night visits were not dreams, and they remained forever as vivid to her as the memory of the way the pigeons' iridescent necklaces flirted with the light," unquote. Or, in the same story, the girl had never had an overwhelming curiosity about her mother, but it fascinated her to see the face of the lady in all of the pictures on a woman who moved and laughed and did other things. Or in the stunning profile of Caesar and his world, a character in The Young Lions, there was nothing like an empty apartment to bring down the soul. And the humor strung to an ethic and wisdom peculiar to our parents and our grandparents, as in the store, quote, "My mother always said that every bullfrog praises his own poem," unquote. Or the narrator in the same story explaining an encounter with an unfriendly cop who has stopped him from crossing the street on a red light, for crossing the street on a red light. Quote, "I tried to be funny and told him the joke my father had always told, that I thought the green light was for white folks and the red light was for colored people." The cop's face reddened big time. Or in the same story, "My mother once told me that in place of muscles, God gave women the ability to cry on a moment's notice." The portrait of the narrator in the store, as that of Caesar in Young Lions, is brilliantly believable and real in its understatement and taut character development. We can't help but think that we have known or seen these men somewhere in our lives. Edward P. Jones was born and raised here in Washington. He received his BA from Holy Cross College and his NMFA at the University of Virginia. His short stories have been published in the Paris Review, Plowshares, Callaloo, and Essence, among other magazines. In 1986, he won the National Endowment for the Arts Award, and in 1992, he became a National Book Award finalist for Lost in the City. The Washington Post observes, quote, "Jones is a lucid, appealing writer. He puts on no airs, tells his stories matter-of-factly, forthrightly, yet his prose is distinctive and carries more weight than first impressions might suggest." Another reviewer states, "He brings a Chekhovian patience, respect, and reserve to the world he describes, and it is somehow precisely this old-fashioned quality brought to bear on the modern African-American community that makes Lost in the City so bracingly new." And Edward Jones himself observes, "I didn't want to mention any politics at all. For the most part, I just write about working-class people. That's what my mother was. That's what the people around me are." It is with boundless pleasure that I invite you to welcome a neighbor, a colleague, a born Washingtonian, Edward P. Jones, author of Lost in the City.
If I can make it, I'm going to do something tonight that I haven't done before, and that's read 3 stories instead of 2 or 1. The first one is titled The First Day, and the narrator is a little girl. She's speaking in the first person. On an otherwise unremarkable September morning, long before I learned to be ashamed of my mother, she takes my hand and we set off down New Jersey Avenue to begin my very first day of school. I'm wearing a checkered light blue and green cotton dress, and scattered about these colors are bits of yellow and white and brown. My mother has uncharacteristically spent nearly an hour on my hair that morning, plaiting and replaiting, so that now my scalp tingles. Whenever I turn my head quickly, my nose fills with the faint smell of Dixie Peach hair grease. The smell is somehow a soothing one now, and I will reach for it time and time again before the morning ends. All the plaits, each with a blue barrette near the tip, and each twisted into an uncommon sturdiness, will last until I go to bed that night, something that has never happened before. My stomach is full of milk and oatmeal sweetened with brown sugar. Like everything else I have on, my pale green slip and underwear are new, the underwear having come three to a plastic package with a little girl in the front who appears to be dancing. Behind my ears, my mother, to stop my whining, has dabbed the stingiest bit of her gardenia perfume, the last present my father gave her before he disappeared into memory. Because I cannot smell it, I have only her word that the perfume is there. I am also wearing yellow socks trimmed with thin lines of black and white around the tops. My shoes are my greatest joy, black pattern of the miracles, and when one is nicked at the toe later that morning in class, my heart will break. I am carrying a pencil sharpener, and a small 10-cent tablet with a black and white speckled cover. My mother does not believe that a girl in kindergarten needs such things, so I'm taking them only because of my insistent whining and because they are presents from our neighbors, Murray Keith and Blondell Harris. Miss Murray and Miss Blondell are watching my two younger sisters until my mother returns. The women are as precious to me as my mother and sisters. Out playing one day, I have overheard an older child speaking to another child call Miss Murray and Miss Blondell a word that is brand new to me. This is my mother. When I say the word in fun to one of my sisters, my mother slaps me across the mouth, and the word is lost for years and years. All the way down New Jersey Avenue, the sidewalks are teeming with children. In my neighborhood, I have many friends, but I see none of them as my mother and I walk. We cross New York Avenue, we cross Pierce Street, and we cross Ellen K., and still I see no one who knows my name. At I Street between New Jersey Avenue and 3rd Street, we enter Seton Elementary School, a time-worn, sad-faced building across the street from my mother's church, Mount Carmel Baptist. Just inside the front door, women out of the advertisements in ebony are greeting other parents and children. The woman who greets us is pearls thick as jumbo marbles that come down almost to her navel, and she acts as if she has known me all my life, touching my shoulder, cupping her hand under my chin. She is enveloped in a perfume that I only know is not gardenia. When, in answer to her question, my mother tells her that we live at 1227 New Jersey Avenue, the woman first seems to be picturing in her head where we live. Then she shakes her head and says that we are at the wrong school, that we should be at Walker Jones. My mother shakes her head vigorously. I wanted to go here, my mother says. If I'd have wanted her someplace else, I'd have took her there. The woman continues to act as if she has known me all my life, but she tells my mother that we live beyond the area that Seton serves. My mother is not convinced, and for several more minutes she questions the woman about why I cannot attend Seton. For as many Sundays as I can remember, perhaps even Sundays when I was in her womb, my mother has pointed across I Street to Seton as we come and go to Mount Carmel. You're going to go there and learn about the whole world. But one of the guardians of that place is saying no, and no again. I'm learning this about my mother. The higher up on the scale of respectability a person is, and teachers are rather high up in her eyes, the less she is liable to let them push her around. But finally, I see in her eyes the closing gate, and she takes my hand and we leave the building. On the steps, she stops as people move past us on either side. Mom, I can't go to school? She says nothing at first and takes my hand again, and we are down the steps quickly and nearing New Jersey Avenue before I can blink. This is my mother. She says, one monkey don't stop no show. Walker Jones is a larger, newer school, and I immediately like it because of that. But it is not across the street from my mother's church, her rock, one of her connections to God, and I sense her doubts as she absently rubs her thumb over the back of my hand. We find our way to the crowded auditorium where gray metal chairs are set up in the middle of the room. Along the wall to the left are tables and other chairs. Every chair seems occupied by a child or adult. Somewhere in the room a child is crying, a cry that rises above the buzz talk of so many people. Strewn about the floor are dozens and dozens of pieces of white paper, and people are walking over them without any thought of picking them up. And seeing this lack of concern, I am all of a sudden afraid. Is this where they register for school? My mother asks a woman at one of the tables. The woman looks up slowly as if she has heard this question once too often. She nods. She is tiny, almost as small as the girl standing beside her. The woman's hair is set in a mass of curlers, and all of those curlers are made of paper money. Here a dollar bill, there a $5 bill. The girl's hair is arrayed in curls, but some of them are beginning to droop, and this makes me happy. On the table beside the woman's pocketbook is a large notebook worthy of someone in high school, and looking at me, looking at the notebook, the girl places her hand possessively on it. In her other hand, she holds several pencils with thick crowns of additional erasers. "These are forms you gotta use," my mother asked the woman, picking up a few pieces of the paper from the table. "Is this what you had to fill out?" The woman tells her yes, but that she need fill out only one. "I see," my mother says, looking about the room. "Then, would you help me with this form? That is, if you don't mind." The woman asks my mother what she means. "This form, would you mind helping me fill it out?" The woman still seems not to understand. "I can't read it. I don't know how to read or write, and I'm asking you to help me." My mother looks at me, then looks away. I know almost all of her looks, but this one is brand new to me. "Would you help me then?" The woman says, "Why, sure," and suddenly she appears happier, so much more satisfied with everything. She finishes the form for her daughter, and my mother and I step aside to wait for her. We find 2 chairs nearby and sit. My mother is now diseased, according to the girl's eyes, and until the moment her mother takes her and the form to the front of the auditorium, the girl never stops looking at my mother. I stare back at her. "Don't stare," my mother says to me. "You know better than that." Another woman out of the ebony ads takes the woman's child away. "Now," the woman says upon returning, "let's see what we can do for you two." My mother answers the question. The woman reads off the form. They start with my last name and then get on to the first and middle names. "This is school, I think. This is going to school." My mother slowly enunciates each word of my name. "This is my mother." As the questions go on, she takes from her pocketbook document after document, as if they will support my right to attend school, as if she has been saving them up for just this moment. Indeed, she takes out more papers than I've ever seen her do in other places. My birth certificate, my baptismal record, a doctor's letter concerning my bout with chickenpox, rent receipts, records of immunization, a letter about our public assistance payments, even a marriage license. Every single paper that has anything even remotely to do with my 5-year-old life. A few of the papers are needed here, but it does not matter, and my mother continues to pull out the documents with the purposelessness of a magician pulling out a long string of scarves. She has learned that money is the beginning and end of everything in this world, and when the woman finishes, my mother offers her 50 cents, and the woman accepts it without hesitation. My mother and I are just about the last parent and child in the room. My mother presents a form to a woman sitting in front of the stage, and a woman looks at it and writes something on a white card, which she gives to my mother. Before long, the woman who has taken the girl with the drooping curls appears from behind us, speaks to the sitting woman, and introduces herself to my mother and me. She used to be my teacher, she tells my mother. My mother stares. We go into the hall where my mother kneels down to me. Her lips are quivering. "I'll be back to pick you up at 12 o'clock. I don't want you to go nowhere. You just wait right here and listen to every word she say." I touch her lips and press them together. It is an old game between us. She puts my hand down at my side, which is not part of the game. She stands and looks a second at the teacher, and then she turns and walks away. I see where she has darned one of her socks the night before. Her shoes make loud sounds in the hall. She passes through the doors, and I can still hear the loud sounds of her shoes. And even when the teacher turns me toward the classrooms, and I hear what must be the singing and talking of all the children in the world, I can still hear my mother's footsteps above it all. The next one is titled "A New Man," and I've never read this in public, so if I stumble here and there, I think you'll understand why. One day in late October, Woodrow Cunningham came home early with his bad heart and found his daughter with the 2 boys. He was then 52 years old, a conscientious deacon at Rising Star AME Zion, a paid-up lifetime member of the NAACP and the Urban League, a 25-year member of the Elks. For 10 years, he had been the chief engineer at the Sheridan Park Hotel, where practically every employee knew his name. For longer than he could recall, his friends and lodge members had been telling him that he was capable of being more than just a number one maintenance man. But he always told them that he was contented in the job, that it was all he needed, and this was true for the most part. He would be in the same position some 13 years later when death happened upon him as he bent down over a hotel bathroom sink, about to do a job a younger engineer claimed he could not handle. The afternoon he came home early and discovered his daughter with the boys. He found a letter in the mailbox from his father in Georgia. He read the letter while standing in the hall of the apartment building. He expected nothing of importance as usual, and that was what he found. Alice took me to Buddy Wilson's funeral just last week, Woodrow read. I loaned him the shirt they buried in him, and that tie he had on was the one I'd give him too. I thought I would miss him, but I do not miss him very much. Checkers was never Buddy Wilson's game. As he read, he massaged the area around his heart, an old habit, something he did even when his heart was not giving him trouble. I hope you and the family can come down before the winter months set in. Company is never the same after winter get here. He put the letter back in the envelope, and as he absently looked at the upside-down stamp taped in the vicinity of the corner, the pain in his heart eased. He could picture his father sitting at the kitchen table, writing the letter, occasionally touching the pencil point to his tongue. A new mongrel's head would be resting across his lap, across thin legs that could still carry the old man 5 miles down the road and back. Woodrow, feeling better, considered returning to work, but he knew his heart was deceitful. He folded the envelope and stuck it in his back pocket, and out of the pocket it would fall late that night as he prepared for bed after returning from the police station. Several feet before he reached his apartment door, he could hear the boys' laughter and bits and pieces of their man-child conquer the world talk. He could not hear his daughter at first. He stopped at his door and listened for nearly 5 minutes, and in that time he became so fascinated by what the boys were saying that he would not have cared if someone walking in the hall found him listening. It was only when he heard his daughter's laughter, familiar, known, that he put his key in the door. She stood just inside the door when he entered, her eyes accusing, but her mouth set in a small O of surprise. Beyond her, he could see the boys with their legs draped over the arms of the couch and gray smoke above their heads wafting toward the open window. He asked his daughter, "Why ain't you in school?" "They let us out early today," she said. "The teacher said some kind of meeting." He did not listen to her because he had found that she lived to lie. Woodrow watched the boys as they took their time straightening themselves up, and he knew that their deliberateness was the result of something his daughter had said about him. Without taking his eyes from the boys, he asked his daughter again why she wasn't in school. When he finally looked at her, he saw that she was holding the stump of a thin cigarette. The smoke he smelled was unfamiliar, and at first he thought that they were smoking very stale cigarettes, or cigarettes that had gotten wet and been dried. He slapped her. "I told you not to smoke in my house," he said. She was 15, and up until 6 months or so before, she would have collapsed into the chair, collapsed into a fit of crying. But now she picked up the fallen cigarette from the floor and stamped it out in the ashtray on the tiny table beside the easy chair. Her hand shook, the only reminder of the old days. "We just talking. We ain't doing nothing wrong," she said quietly. He shouted to the boys, "Get out of my house." They stood up quickly, and Woodrow could tell that whatever she had told them about him, such anger was not part of it. They looked once at the girl. "They might guess, Daddy," she said, sitting in the easy chair and crossing her legs. "I invited them over here." Woodrow took 2 steps to the boy nearest him, the tall, light-skinned one he would spot from a bus window a year or so later, and grabbed him with one hand by the jacket collar, shook him until the boy raised his hand as if to protect his face from a blow. The boy's eyes widened, and Woodrow shook him some more. He had been living a black man's civilized life in Washington and had not felt so coiled and bristled since the days when he worked with wild men in the turpentine camps in Florida. "I ain't done nothing," the boy said. The words sounded familiar, similar to those of a wild man ready to slink away into his cabin with his tail between his legs. Woodrow relaxed. "That's square. I don't want no trouble, Mr. Cunningham." The boy had no other smell but that peculiar cigarette smoke, and it was a shock to Woodrow that a body with that smell should know something that seemed as personal as his name. The other, smaller boy tiptoed around Woodrow and was having trouble opening the door. After the small boy had gone out, Woodrow flung the light-skinned boy out behind him. Woodrow locked the door, and the boy stood for several minutes, pounding on the door, mouthing off. "Why you treat my guest like that?" Elaine Cunningham had not moved from the chair. "Clean up this mess," he told her, "and I don't want to see one ash when you're done." She said nothing more, but busied herself tidying the couch cushions. Then Woodrow, after flicking the cushions a few times with his handkerchief, sat in the middle of the couch, and the couch sagged with the familiarity of his weight. When Elaine had returned the room to what it was, her father said, "I want to know what you was doing in here with them boys." "Nothing. We wasn't doing nothing. Just talking, that's all, Daddy." She sat in the easy chair, leaned toward him with her elbows on her knees. "You can do your talking down on the stoop," he said. "Why don't you just say you're trying to accuse me of something? Why don't you just come out and say it?" "If you didn't do things, you wouldn't get accused," he said. He talked without thought, because those words and words like them had been spoken so much to her that he was able to parrot himself. If you start acting like a young lady should, start studying and whatnot, and trying to make something of yourself. Woodrow L. Cunningham, being Woodrow L. Cunningham, he thought. She stood up quickly, and he was sickened to see her breasts bounce. "I could study them stupid books half the damn day and sit in church the other half, and I'd still get the same stuff thrown in my face about how I ain't doing right. Okay, that's enough of that." He felt a familiar rumbling in his heart. "I done heard enough. I want to go out." She stood with her arms folded. "I want to go out." "Go on back to your room. That's the only going out you're going to be doing. I don't want to hear another word out of you or out of your mouth till your mother get home." He closed his eyes to wait her out, for he knew she was now capable of standing there till doomsday, till sulk. When he heard her going down the hall, he waited for the door to slam, but there was no sound, and he gradually opened his eyes. He put a cushion at one end of the couch and took off his shoes and lay down, his hands resting on the large mound that was his stomach. All his friends told him that if he lost 30 or 40 pounds, he would be a new man, but he did not think that was true. He considered asking Elaine to bring his pills from his bedroom, for he had left the vial he traveled with at work, but he suffered the pain rather than suffer a stirring about. He watched his wife's curtains flap gently with the breeze, and the movement soothed them. "I would not say anything bad about marriage," his father had written to Woodrow, after Woodrow called to say he was considering marrying Rita Hadley. It is easier to pick up and walk away from a wife and a family if you don't like it than you can walk away from your own bad cooking. Woodrow had never been inclined to marry anyone, was able, as he would tell his large brothers, to get all the trim he wanted without buying some woman a ring and walking down the aisle with her. Doing it to a woman for a few months was all right, he would say, sounding like his father, because that only put the idea of marrying in their heads. Doing it to them any more than that, and the idea takes root. It had never crossed his mind to sleep with any other woman at Rising Star AME, for he had discovered in Georgia that the wrath of church women was greater than that of all others, even old whores. He only went out with Rita because the preacher took him aside one Sunday and told him it was unnatural to go about unmarried, and that he should give some thought to promenading with Sister Rita sometime. And, too, he was 36, and it was beginning to occur to him that women might not go on forever laying down and opening their legs for him. The second time they went out, he put his arm around Rita and pulled her to him there in the Booker T Theater. She smacked his hand, and that made his Johnson hard. "I ain't like that, Mr. Cunningham." He had heard those words before, but when he pulled her to him again, she twisted his finger until it hurt, and that was something he had not experienced before. His father suffered a mild stroke a week before the wedding. "Do not take this sickness to mean that I do not send my blessing to your marriage to Miss Rita Hadley," his father said in a letter he had dictated to Alice, his oldest daughter. "God took pity on you when he sent her your way." Even in the unfamiliarity of Alice's handwriting, The familiarity of his father was there in all the lines, right down to the misspelled words. Until some of his father's children learned in their teens, his father had been the only one in the family who could read and write. "This," he said of his reading and writing, "makes me as good as a white man." And before some of his children discovered there was no magic to it, he enjoyed reading aloud at the supper table to his family, his voice stringing out a long monotone of words that often meant nothing to him and even less to his family because the man read so quickly. His father read anything he could get his hands on, the words on feed bags, on medicine bottles, on years-old magazine pages they used for wallpaper, just about everything except the Bible. He had a fondness for weeks-old newspapers he would find in the streets when he went to town. No one, not even the squirming small kids, was allowed to move from the supper table until he had finished reading, hooking one word to another until it all became babble. Indeed, it was such a babble that some of his sons would joke behind his back that he was lying about knowing how to read. "Few white men can do what I'm doing right now," he would say. "You go bring 10 white men in here, and I bet 9 couldn't read this, couldn't read it if God commanded him to." Sometimes, to torment his wife, he would hold a scrap of newspaper close to her face and tell her to read the headlines. "I can't," she said. "You know I can't." No matter how many times he did this, his father would laugh with the pleasure the very first time. Then he would pass the newspaper among his children and tell them to read the headlines, and each one would hold it uncomfortably and repeat what their mother had said. When Woodrow woke, it was nearly 5 o'clock, and his wife was sitting on the side of the couch, asking where Elaine was. "She ain't in her room," his wife said, and kissed his forehead. A school cafeteria worker, Rita was a very thin woman who, before she met Woodrow, had lived only for her job and her church activities. She was 5 years older than he was and had resigned herself to the fact that she was not the type of women men wanted to marry. "I put it all in God's hands," she once said to a friend before Woodrow came along, and left it there. Rita waited until 7 o'clock before she began calling her daughter's friends. "Stop worrying," Woodrow told her after the 10th call. "You know how that girl is." At 8:30 they put on light coats and went in search, visiting the same houses and apartments that Rita had called. They returned home about 10 and waited until 11 when they put on their coats again and went to the police station at 16th and V Northwest. They did not call the station because somewhere Woodrow had heard that the law wouldn't begin to hear a complaint unless you stood before it in person. At the station, the man at the front desk did not look up until they had been standing there for some 2 minutes. Woodrow wanted to tell him that the police chief and the mayor were now black men and that they couldn't be ignored, but when the man behind the desk looked up, Woodrow could see in his eyes that none of that would have mattered to him. "Our daughter is missing," Rita said. "How long?" said the man, a sergeant with an unpronounceable name on his name tag. He pulled a form from a pile to his left, and then he took up a pen, loudly clicking out the point to write. "We haven't seen her since this afternoon," Woodrow said. The sergeant clicked the pen again and set it on the desk and put the form back on top of the others. "Not long enough," he said. "Has to be gone 48 hours. Till then she's missing, but she's not a missing person." "She only a baby." "How old?" 15, Woodrow said. "She's just a runaway," the sergeant said. "She never run away before," Woodrow said. "This ain't like her, Sergeant." Woodrow felt that, like all white men, the man enjoyed having attention paid to his rank. "Don't matter. She's probably waiting for you at home right now, wondering where you two boogied off to. Go home. If she isn't home, then come back when she's a missing person." Woodrow took Rita's arm as they went back because he sensed that she was near collapsing. "What happened?" she asked as they turned the corner view in 10th Streets. "Did you say something bad to her?" He told her everything that he could remember, even what Elaine was wearing when he last saw her. Answering was not difficult because no blame had yet been assigned. Despite the time nearing midnight, they became confident with each step that Elaine was just at a friend's they did not know about, that the friend's mother, like any good mother, would soon send their daughter home. Rita, in the last blocks before their apartment, leaned into her husband, and his warmth helped to put her at ease. They waited up until 4 in the morning, and then they undressed without words in the dark. Rita began to cry the moment her head hit the pillow, for she was afraid to see the sun come up and find that a new day had arrived without Elaine being home. She asked him again what happened, and he told her again, even things that he had forgotten. The logo of the football team on the light-skinned boy's jacket, the fact that the other boy was bald except for a half-dollar-sized spot of hair carved on the back of his head. He was still talking when she dozed off with him holding her. Before they had coffee later that morning, about 7:30, they called their jobs to say they would not be in. Work had always occupied a place at the center of their lives, and there was initially something eerie about being home when it was not a holiday or the weekend. They spent the rest of the morning searching the streets together, and in the afternoon they separated to cover more ground. They did the same thing after dinner, each spreading out farther and farther from their apartment on R Street. That evening, they called neighbors and friends, church and lodge members, to tell them that their child was missing and that they needed their help and their prayers. Their friends and neighbors began searching that evening, and a few went with Woodrow and Rita the next day to the police station to file a missing persons report. A different sergeant was at the desk, and though he was a white man, Woodrow felt that he understood their trouble. For nearly 3 months, Woodrow and Rita searched after they came from work, and each evening after they and their friends had been out, the pastor, Rising Star, spoke to a small group that gathered in the Cunningham's living room. "The world is cold and not hospitable," he would conclude, holding his hat in both hands. "But we know our God to be a kind God, and that he has provided our little sister with a place of comfort and warmth until she returns to her parents and to all of us who love and treasure her." In the kitchen beside the refrigerator, Rita tacked up a giant map of Washington, on which she noted where she and others had searched. "I didn't know this city was this big," she said the day she put it up, her fingertips touching the neighborhoods that she had never heard of or had heard of only in passing, foreign lands she thought she would never set eyes on, Petworth, Anacostia, Lincoln Park. And in the beginning, the very size of the city lifted her spirits, for in a place so big, there was certainly a spot that held something as small as her child, and if they just kept looking long enough, they would come upon that place. "What happened?" Rita would ask as they prepared for bed. What he told her and her listening replaced everything they'd ever done in that bed, discussing what future they wanted for Elaine, lovemaking, sharing what the world had done to them that work day. What happened? It was just about the only thing she ever asked Woodrow as the months grew colder. What happened? What you say to her? By late February, when fewer and fewer people were going out to search, he had told the whole story, but then he began to tell her things that had not happened. There were 3 boys, he said at one point, for example, or he could see a gun sticking out of the jacket pocket of the light-skinned one, and he could see the outline of a knife in the back pants pocket of the third. Or he would say that the record player was playing so loudly he could hear it from the street. They were small embellishments at first, and if his wife noticed that the story of what happened was changing, she said nothing. In time, with winter disappearing, he was adding more and more, so that it was no longer a falseness here and there that was embedded in the whole of the truth, but the truth itself, an ever-diminishing kernel that was contained in the whole of falseness. And, like some kind of bedtime story, she listened and drifted with his words into a sleep where the things he was telling her were sometimes happening. By March, Woodrow had written countless letters to his father, telling the old man it was not necessary to come to Washington to help look for the girl. "I got a sign from God," the old man kept writing, "that I could help find her." Then, with spring, he began writing that he had received signs that he was not long for the world, that finding the girl was the last thing God wanted him to do. In the longest letters the old man had ever written to the one child of his who responded, he would go on and on about the signs he saw signaling his own death. The Mongol would no longer take food from his hand. The dead visited him at night, sitting down on the side of his bed and telling him things about himself. The rising sun now touched his house late in the morning, though there were houses to the left and right of his. "You keep telling me that I'll be hurt or lost," the old man wrote Woodrow, "but I know the way that Washington, D.C. is set up. I came there once, maybe twice. How could I get lost? Take a chance on me, and we'll have that child home before he can blink one eye. I can bring Sparky. He got some bloodhound in him. In late April, Rita took down the map in the kitchen. The tacks fell to the floor, and she left them there. She put the map in the bottom drawer of her daughter's dresser, among the blouses and blue jeans and a diary she would not find the strength to read for another 3 months. Her days of searching during the day dwindled down to 2, then to 1. She returned the car a church member had lent her to drive around the city. Each evening when she got home, Woodrow would be out, and she left his dinner in the oven to stay warm. Every now and again, when the hour was late, she went out to look for him, often for no other reason than that there was nothing worth watching on the television. As she put on more and more weight, it became difficult for her to stand and dish out food to the students at lunchtime. Her supervisor and fellow workers sympathized, and after a week of perfunctory training, she was allowed to sit and work at the cash register. As he continued going about the city, sometimes on foot, Woodrow told himself and everyone else that he was hunting for his daughter, but this was only a piece of the truth. I'm looking for my daughter, who's run away, he'd say to those opening the doors where he knocked. She's been gone a long time, and her mom and me are about to lose our minds. He sometimes presented a picture of his daughter, smiling radiantly, that was taken only months before she disappeared. But just as often, he would pull out a photograph of the girl when she was 5, standing one Easter between her parents in front of Rising Star. All who looked at the photograph, even the drunks, half blind with alcohol, were touched by the picture of the little girl in her Easter dress who had now gone away from her parents who were now worried sick. And many people invited Woodrow into their homes. The Easter picture became a passport, and the more places he visited it, the more places he wanted to see. On U Street, a woman of 25 or so with 3 children put down the child she was holding to get a better look at the picture of the 5-year-old girl. Woodrow, in the doorway, noted just over her shoulder that on her wall there was a calendar with a snow-covered mountain hung with the prominence others would have given a landscape painting. An old woman on Harvard Street, tisk-tisking as she looked at the picture, invited him in for coffee and cake. My prayers go out to you. Nearly everything in her apartment was covered in plastic, even the pictures on the walls. The old woman sat on her plastic-covered couch and placed the food on a coffee table covered with a plastic cloth. And such a sweet-looking child, too, son. When he asked to use the bathroom, more out of curiosity than for relief, she pointed to a plastic path leading way down the hall. Stay on the mat, son. A tottering man in a place on 21st Street just off Benning Road began to cry when Woodrow told him his story. Dora, Dora, the man called to a woman, come see this little angel. The woman, who was also tottering, pulled Woodrow into their house with one hand, while the other hand pressed the picture to her bosom. The man and Woodrow sat on the couch. The woman stood in front of them, swaying trance-like, her eyes closed, the picture still pressed to her. The man put his arm around Woodrow and breathed a sour wine smell into his face. Let's me and you pray about this situation, he said. One April evening, a little more than a year and a half after their daughter disappeared, Rita was standing in front of their building, waiting for him. We have fish tonight. It's in the stove waiting, she said, in the same way she would have said, I know what you've been doing and who you've been doing it with. We have fish to eat, she said again. She turned around and went back inside. We have fish, and we have to move from this place, she said. Woodrow's father died nearly 7 years after Elaine Cunningham disappeared. Of the 8 children he had had with Woodrow's mother and the 5 he had had with other women, only Woodrow, Alice, and a half-brother who lived down the road from the old man came to the funeral. It was a frozen day in January, and the grave diggers broke 2 picks before they'd even gone down 1 foot. They labored 7 hours to make a hole for the old man. Even the ground don't want him, said one of the old man's friends standing at the grave site. There was not much in the old man's place to divide among his heirs. In a wooden trunk in one of the back rooms, Woodrow found several pictures of his mother. He had been kneeling down, going through the trunk, and when he saw the pictures, he cried out as if he had been struck. He had not seen his mother's face in more than 40 years, had thought his father destroyed all the pictures of her. "You always look like her," Alice said, coming up behind him. "Even when you sat at the right hand of the Father, you look like her." Though he was younger than 3 other brothers, Woodrow had worked hardest of his father's children. At first, his father sat his children about the supper table according to their ages, but then he began to seat them according to who did the most work. His best workers sat closest to him, and by the time he was 7, Woodrow had worked his way to the right hand of his father. Woodrow's mother sat at the far end of the table between 2 of her daughters. Most of his brothers and sisters, unable to pick the amount of cotton Woodrow could, never forgave him for living only to be close to their father. But he learned to pay them no mind and even learned to enjoy their hostility. He never moved from that right-hand place until the day he went off down the road to work in the turpentine camps. He also found in the trunk some letters he wrote his father from the camps and from railroad yards and from the places he worked as he made his way up to Washington. They were all of 1 page or less, and they were all about work from sunup to sundown. There were no friends mentioned, there were no descriptions of places where he lived, there were no names of women courted, loved. "I got a 2-week job tanning hides," he wrote from a nameless place in South Carolina. "I got work curing tobacco. I may stay on after another season," he wrote from somewhere near Raleigh. "I have been working in the stables outside Charlottesville. The pay is good. I got used to the smell, and the work goes easy." Woodrow and Rita took the train back to Washington, bringing back a few of the pictures and other letters, which he burned in a barrel outside his father's house. Everything along the way back to D.C. was as frozen as Georgia. It was as if the cold had separated the world into 3 unrelated and distinct parts. The earth was on the earth and the sky above. Nothing moved. Flying birds seemed to freeze in midair, and then the cold would nail them there. Rita and Woodrow were back in the apartment on Independence Avenue in Southeast by 10 o'clock that night. Rita took her usual place at an easy chair near the window. On a table beside the chair was all she needed: the television guide, snacks, the telephone. The chair was very large, and it had to be specially ordered because she could not fit into the regular ones in the store. Woodrow, even though the hour was late and the weather people were predicting even colder temperatures, quietly put on his heaviest coat and left the apartment. He said nothing to Rita, and she did not look up when the door locked behind him. At the corner of Independence and 15th, Woodrow looked into the grocery store window at the owner he had become friends with since moving to Southeast. No customers went into the store, and the owner was dozing behind the counter, his head back, his mouth open. Woodrow watched him for a very long time. By now he knew everything about the man and his store and the sons who helped the man, and there was no urgency to be inside with him. Having lost so much weight, Woodrow felt that even more the world had opened up to him, and so he wondered if he should go down 15th Street, try to find a house he had not visited before, and bring out the picture of the child in her Easter dress. If you can stand it, I'll read one more. This is titled Marie. Every now and again, as if on a whim, the federal government people would write to Marie Delaware Wilson in one of those white stampless envelopes and tell her to come into their place so they could take another look at her. They, the Social Security people, wrote to her in a foreign language that she had learned to translate over the years, and for all the years she had been receiving the letters, the same man had been signing them. Once, because she had something important to tell him, Marie called the number the man always put at the top of the letters, but a woman answered Mrs. Smith's telephone and told Marie he was in an all-day meeting. Another time she called, and a man said Mrs. Smith was on vacation. And finally one day a woman answered and told Marie that Mrs. Smith was deceased. The woman told her to wait, and she would get someone new to talk to her about her case. But Marie thought it bad luck to have telephoned a dead man, and she hung up. Now, years after the woman had told her Mrs. Smith was no more, the letters were still being signed by John Smith. Come into our office at 21st and M Street Northwest, the letter said in that foreign language. Come in so we can see if you are still blind in one eye. Come in so we can see if you are still old and getting older. Come in so we can see if you still deserve to get supplemental security income payments. She always obeyed the letters, even if the order now came from a dead man, for she knew people who had been temporarily cut off from SSI for not showing up, or even for being late. And once cut off, you had to move heaven and earth to get back on. So on a not unpleasant day in March, she rose in the dark in the morning, even before the day had any sort of character, to give herself plenty of time to bathe, eat, lay out money for the bus, dress, listen to the spirituals on the radio. She was 86 years old and had learned that life was all chaos and painful uncertainty, and that the only way to get through it was to expect chaos, even in the most innocent of moments. Offer a crust of bread to a sick bird, and he often drew back a bloody finger. John Smith's letter had told her to come in at 11 o'clock, his favorite time. By 9 that morning, she had had her bath and had eaten, dressed by 9:30. The walk from Claridge Towers at 12th and M down to the bus stop at 14th and K took her about 10 minutes, more or less. There was a bus at about 10:30, her schedule told her, but she preferred the one that came a half hour earlier, least there'd be trouble with the 10:30 bus. After she dressed, she sat at her dining room table and went over still again what papers and all else she needed to take. Given the nature of life, particularly the questions asked by the Social Security people, she always took more than they might ask for: her birth certificate, her husband's death certificate, doctor's letters. One of the last things she put in her pocketbook was a 7-inch or so knife that she had, with the use of a small saw borrowed from a neighbor, serrated on both edges. The knife, she was convinced now, had saved her life about 2 weeks before. Before then, she had often been careless about when she took the knife out with her, and she'd never taken it out in daylight, but now she never left her apartment without it, even when going down the hall to the trash drop. She had gone out to buy a simple box of oatmeal, no more, no less. It was about 7 in the evening, the streets with enough commuters driving up 13th Street to make her feel safe. Several yards before she reached the store, the young man came from behind her and tried to rip off her coat pocket where he thought she kept her money, for she carried no purse or pocketbook after 5 o'clock. The money was in the other pocket with the knife, and his hand caught in the empty pocket long enough for her to reach around with the knife and cut his hand as it came out of her pocket. He screamed and called her an old bitch. He took a few steps up 13th Street and stood in front of Emerson's Market, examining the hand and shaking off blood. Except for the cars passing up and down 13th Street, they were alone, and she began to pray. "You cut me," he said, as if he'd only been minding his own business when she cut him. "Just look what you've done to my hand," he said, and looked around as if for some witness to a crime. There was not a great amount of blood, but there was enough for her to see it dripping to the pavement. He seemed to be about 20, no more than 25, dressed the way they were all dressed nowadays, as if a blind man had mashed up all their colors. It occurred to her to say that she had 7 grandchildren his age. By telling him this, he would leave her alone. But the more filth he spoke, the more she wanted him only to come toward her again. "You done crippled me, you old bitch." "I sure did," she said, without malice, without triumph, but simply the way she would have told him the time of day had he asked, and had she known. She gripped the knife tighter, and as she did, she turned her body ever so slightly so that her good eye lined up with him. Her heart was making an awful racket, wanting to be away from him, wanting to be safe at home. "I will not be moved," some organ in the neighborhood of the heart told the heart, and I got plenty more where that come from. The last word seemed to bring him down some, and still shaking the blood from his hand, he took a step or two back, which disappointed her. "I will not be moved," that other organ kept telling the heart. "You're just crazy, that's all," he said, just a crazy old hag. Then he turned and lumbered up toward Logan Circle, and several times he looked back over his shoulder as if afraid she might be following. A man came out of Emerson's and a woman with 2 little boys. She wanted to grab each of them by the arm and tell them she had come close to losing her life. "I saved myself with this here thing," she would have said. She forgot about the oatmeal and took her raging heart back to the apartment. She told herself that she should, but she never washed the fellow's blood off the knife, and over the next few days it dried, and then it began to flake off. Toward 10 o'clock that morning, Wilhelmina Mason knocked and let herself in with the key Marie had given her. "I see you already," Wilhelmina said. "With the help of the Lord," Marie said. "Want a spot of coffee?" "No, thanks," Wilhelmina said, and dropped into a chair at the table. "Been drinking so much coffee lately, I'm going to turn into coffee. Was up all night with Calhoun." "How are you doing?" Wilhelmina told her Calhoun was better that morning, his first good morning in over a week. Calhoun Lambert was Wilhelmina's boyfriend, a 75-year-old man she'd taken up with 6 or so months before, not long after he moved in. He was the best-dressed old man Marie had ever known, but he had always appeared to be sickly, even while strutting about with his gold-tipped cane, and seeing that she could count his days on the fingers of her hand, Marie had avoided getting to know him. She could not understand why Wilhelmina, who could have had any man in Claridge Towers or any other senior citizen building for that matter, would take such a man into her bed. True love, Wilhelmina had explained. Avoid heartache, Marie had said, trying to be kind. They left the apartment. Marie sought help from no one, lest she come to depend on a person too much, but since the encounter with the young man, Wilhelmina insisted on escorting Marie. Marie, to avoid arguments, allowed Wilhelmina to walk with her from time to time to the bus stop, but no farther. Nothing fit Marie's theory about life like the weather in Washington. 2 days before the temperature had been in the 40s, and yesterday it had dropped to the low 20s, then warmed up a bit, with the afternoon bringing snow flurries. Today the weather people on the radio had said it was warm enough to wear a sweater, but Marie was wearing her coat. And tomorrow the weather people said it would be in the 30s, with maybe an inch or so of snow. Appointments near 12 o'clock were always risky because the Social Security people often took off for lunch long before noon and returned sometime after 1. And except for a few employees who seemed to work through their lunch hours, the place shut down. Marie had never been interviewed by someone willing to work through the lunch hour. Today, though the appointment was for 11, she waited until 1:30 before the woman at the front of the waiting room told her she would have to come back another day because the woman who handled her case was not in. "You put my name down when I came in like everything was all right," Marie said after she had been called up to the woman's desk. "I know," the woman said, "but I thought that Mrs. Brown was in. They told me she was in. I'm sorry." The woman began writing in a logbook that rested beside her between her telephone and a triptych of photographs. She handed Marie a slip and told her again she was sorry. "Why you had me wait so long if she wasn't here?" She did not want to say too much, appeared too upset, for the Social Security people could be unforgiving. And though she was used to waiting 3 and 4 hours, she found it especially unfair to wait when there was no one for her at all behind those panels the Social Security people use for offices. "I've been here since before 11. "I know," the woman behind the desk said. "I know. I saw you there, ma'am. But I really didn't know Mrs. Brown wasn't here." There was a nameplate at the front of the woman's desk, and it said Vernell Wise. The name was surrounded by little hearts, the kind the child might have drawn. Marie said nothing more and left. The next appointment was 2 weeks later, 8:30, a good hour, and the day before a letter signed by John Smith arrived to remind her. She expected to be out at least by 12. 3 times before 11 o'clock, Marie asked Vernell Wise if the man, Mr. Green, who was handling her case, was in that day, and each time the woman assured her that he was. At 12, Marie ate 1 of the 2 oranges and 3 of the 5 slices of cheese she had brought. At 1, she asked again if Mr. Green was indeed in that day, and politely reminded Vernell Wise that she had been waiting since about 8 that morning. Vernell was just as polite and told her the wait would soon be over. At 1:15, Marie began to watch the clock hands creep around the dial. She had not paid much attention to the people about her, but more and more it seemed that others were being waited on who had arrived long after she had gotten there. After asking about Mr. Green at 1, she had taken a seat near the front, and as more time went by, she found herself forced to listen to the conversation that Vernell was having with the other receptionist next to her. I told him. I just said, get your things and leave, said the other receptionist, who didn't have a nameplate. Did he leave? Vernell wanted to know. Oh, no, the woman said. Not at first, but I picked up some of his stuff. That Christian Dior jacket he worships. I picked up my cigarette lighter and that jacket just like I was going to do something bad to him, and he started moving then. Vernell began laughing. I wish I was there to see that. She was filing her fingernails. Now and again she would look at her fingernails to inspect her work, and if it was satisfactory, she would blow on the nail and on the file. He back? Vernell asked. The other receptionist eyed her. What you think? And they both laughed. Along about 2 o'clock, Marie became hungry again, but she did not want to eat the rest of her food because she did not know how much longer she would be there. There was a soda machine in the corner, but all sodas gave her gas. You know who's going to call you again? The other receptionist was asking Vernell. I hope so, Vernell said. He pretty fly. Seemed decent, too. It kind of put me off when he said he was a car mechanic. I kind of kept trying to take a peek at his fingernails and everything the whole evening, see if they was dirty or what. But that mechanic stuff might be good when you get your car back. My cousin's boyfriend used to do that kind of work, and he made good money, girl. I mean, real good money. Vernell said. Anyway, the kids like him, and you know how peculiar they can be. Tell me about it. They do the job your mother and father used to do, huh? Only on another level. You can say that again, Vernell said. Marie went to her and told her how long she had been waiting. Listen, Vernell said, pointing her fingernail file at Marie. I told you you'll be waited on as soon as possible. This is a busy day, so I think you should just go back to your seat until we call your name. The other receptionist began to giggle. Marie reached across the desk and slapped Vernell Wise with all her might. Vernell dropped the file, which made a cheap tinny sound when it hit the plastic board her chair was on, but no one heard the file because she had begun to cry right away. She looked at Marie as if, in the moment of her greatest need, Marie had denied her. Oh, Vernell Wise said through the tears. Oh, my dear God. The other receptionist in her chair on casters rolled over to Vernell and put her arm around her. Security? The other receptionist hollered. We need security here. The guard at the front door came quickly around the corner, one hand on his holstered gun and the other hand pointing accusatorily at the people seated in the waiting area. Marie had sat down and was looking at the two women almost sympathetically, as if a stranger had come in, hit Vernell Wise, and fled. She slapped Vernell, the other receptionist said. Who did it? The guard said, reaching for the man sitting beside Marie. But when the other receptionist said it was the old lady in the blue coat, the guard held back for the longest time, as if to grab her would be like arresting his own grandmother. He stood blinking, and he would have gone on blinking had Marie not stood up. She was too flustered to wait for the bus, and so took a cab home. Both changed, she locked herself in the apartment, refusing to answer the door or the telephone the rest of the day and most of the next. But she knew that if her family or friends received no answer at the door or on the telephone, they would think something had happened to her. So the next afternoon she began answering the phone and spoke with the chains on, telling Wilhelmina and others that she had a toothache. For days and days after the incident, she ate very little, asked God to forgive her. She was haunted by the way Vernell's cheek had felt, by what it was like to invade and actually touch the flesh of another person. And when she thought too hard, she imagined that she was slicing through the woman's cheek, the way she had sliced with the young man's hand. But as time went on, she began to remember the man's curses and the purplish color of Vernell's fingernails, and all remorse would momentarily take flight. But finally, one morning, nearly 2 weeks after she slapped the woman, she woke with a phrase she had not used or heard since her children were small. You wasn't raised that way. It was the next morning that the thin young man in the suit knocked and asked through the door chains if he could speak with her. She thought that he was a Social Security man, come to tear up her card and papers and tell her that they would send her no more checks. Even when he pulled out an identification card showing that he was a Howard University student, she did not believe. In the end, she told him she didn't want to buy anything, not magazines, not candy, not anything. No, no, he said. I just want to talk to you for a bit about your life and everything. It's for a project for my folklore course. I'm talking to everyone in the building who'll let me. Please, I won't be a bother. Just a little bit of your time. I don't have anything worth talking about, she said, and I don't keep well these days. Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry, but we all got something to say. I promise I won't be a bother. After 10 minutes of his pleas, she opened the door to him because of his suit and his tie clipped with a bird in flight, and because his long, dark, brown fingers reminded her of delicate twigs. But had he turned out to be death with a gun or knife or fingers to crush her neck, she would have not been surprised. My name's George Carter, like the president. He had the kind of voice that old people in their young days would have called womanish. But I was born right here in D.C., born, bred, and buttered, my mother used to say. He stayed the rest of the day, and she fixed him dinner. It scared her to be able to talk so freely with him, and at first she thought that at long last, as she had always feared, senility had taken hold of her. A few hours after he left, she looked his name up in the telephone book, and when a man who sounded like him answered, she hung up immediately, and the next day she did the same thing. He came back at least twice a week for many weeks and would set his cassette recorder on her coffee table. He's taken down my whole life, she told Wilhelmina, almost the way a woman might speak in awe of a new boyfriend. One day he played back for the first time some of what she told the recorder. My father would be sitting there reading the paper. He'd say whenever they put in a new president, looked like he got the chair for 4 years. And it got so that's what I saw. This poor man sitting in that chair for 4 long years while the rest of the world went on about its business. I don't know if I thought he ever did anything, the president. I just knew that he had to sit in that chair for 4 years. Maybe I thought by his sitting in that chair and doing nothing else for 4 years, he made the country what it was, and that without him sitting there, the country wouldn't be what it was. Maybe that's what I got from listening to my father reading and to my mother asking questions about what he was reading. They was like that, you see. George stopped the tape and was about to put the other side in when she touched his hand. No more, George, she said. I can't listen to no more. Please, please, no more. She had never in her whole life heard her own voice. Nothing had been so stunning in a long, long while, and for a few moments before she found herself, her world turned upside down. There, rising from a machine no bigger than her Bible, was a voice frighteningly familiar and yet unfamiliar, talking about a man whom she knew as well as her husbands and her sons, a man dead and buried 60 years. She reached across to George and he handed her the tape. She turned it over and over as if the mystery of everything could be discerned if she turned it enough times. She began to cry, and with her other hand she lightly touched the buttons of the machine. Between the time Marie slapped the woman in the Social Security office and the day she heard her voice for the first time, Calhoun Lambert, Wilhelmina's boyfriend, had been in and out the hospital 3 times. Most evenings when Calhoun's son stayed the night with him, Wilhelmina would come to Marie's and spend most of that evening sitting on the couch that was catty-corner to the easy chair facing the big window. She said very little, which was unlike her, a woman with more friends and hairs on her head, and who, at 68, loved a good party. The most attractive woman Marie knew would only curl her legs up under herself and sip whatever Marie put in her hand. She looked out at the city until she took herself to her apartment or went back down to Calhoun's place. In the beginning, after he returned from the hospital the first time, there was the desire in Marie to remind her friend that she wasn't married to Calhoun, that she should just get up and walk away, something Marie had seen her do with other men she had grown tired of. Late one night, Wilhelmina called and asked her to come down to the man's apartment, for the man's son had to work that night, and she was there alone with him, and she did not want to be alone with him. Sit with me a spell, Wilhelmina said. Marie did not protest, even though she had not said more than 10 words to the man in all the time she knew him. She threw on a bathrobe, picked up her keys and serrated knife, and went down to the 2nd floor. He was propped up on the bed, and he was surprisingly alert and spoke to Marie with an unforced friendliness. She had seen this in other dying people. A kindness and gentleness came over them that was often embarrassing for those around them. Wilhelmina sat on the side of the bed. Calhoun asked Marie to sit in a chair beside the bed, and then he took her hand and held it for the rest of the night. He talked on throughout the night, not always understandable. Wilhelmina, exhausted, eventually lay across the foot of the bed. Almost everything the man had to say was about a time when he was young and was married for a year or so to a woman in Nicodemus, Kansas, a town where there were only black people. Whether the woman had died or whether he had left her, Marie could not make out. She only knew that the woman in Nicodemus seemed to have marked him for life. "You should go to Nicodemus," he said at one point, as if the town was only around the corner. "I stumbled into that place by accident, but you should go on purpose. There ain't much there to see, but you should go there and spend some time there." Toward 4 o'clock that morning, he stopped talking, and moments later, he went home to his God. Marie continued holding the dead man's hand, and she said the Lord's Prayer over and over until it no longer made sense to her. She did not wake Wilhelmina. Eventually, the sun came through the man's Venetian blinds, and she heard the croaking of the pigeons congregating on the window ledge. When she finally placed his hand on his chest, the dead man expelled a burst of air that sounded to Marie like a sigh. It occurred to her that she, a complete stranger, was the last thing he had known in the world, and that now that he was no longer in the world, all she knew of him was that Nicodemus place and a lovesick woman asleep at the foot of his bed. She thought that she was hungry and thirsty, but the more she looked at the dead man and the sleeping woman, the more she realized that what she felt was a sense of loss. 2 days later, the Social Security people sent her a letter, again signed by John Smith, telling her to come to them 1 week hence. There was nothing in the letter about the slap, no threat to cut off her SSI payments because of what she had done. Indeed, it was the same sort of letter John Smith usually sent. She called the number at the top of the letter, and the woman who handled her case told her that Mrs. White would be expecting her on the day and time stated in the letter. Still, she suspected the Social Security people were planning something for her, something at the very least that would be humiliating. And right up until the day before the appointment, she continued calling to confirm that it was okay to come in. Often the person she spoke to after the switchboard woman and before the woman handling her case was Vernell. "Social Security Administration, this is Vernell Wise. May I help you?" And each time Marie heard the receptionist identify herself, she wanted to apologize. "I wasn't raised that way," she wanted to tell the woman. George Carter came the day she got the letter to present her with a cassette machine and copies of the tape she had made about her life. It took quite some time for him to teach her how to use the machine, and after he was gone, she was certain it took so long because she really did not want to know how to use it. That evening, after her dinner, she steeled herself and put a tape marked "Parents, Early Childhood" in the machine. My mother had this idea that everything could be done in Washington, that a human being could take all their troubles to Washington and things would be set right. I think that was all wrapped up with her notion of the government, the Supreme Court, and the president and the like. Up there, she would say, things can be made right. Up there was her only words for Washington. All the other cities had names, but Washington didn't need a name. It was just called up there. I was real small and didn't know any better, so somehow I got to thinking, since things were on the perfect side in Washington, that maybe God lived there, God and his people. When I went back home to visit that first time and told my mother all about my living in Washington, she fell into such a cry, like maybe I'd managed to make it to heaven without dying. That's how people was back in those days. The next morning, she looked for Vernell Wise's name in the telephone book, and for several evenings she would call the number and hang up before the phone had rung 3 times. Finally, on a Sunday, 2 days before the appointment, she let it ring, and what may have been a little boy answered. She could tell he was very young because he said hello in a too loud voice, as if he was not used to talking on the telephone. "Hello?" he said. "Hello, who this? Granddaddy, that you? Hello? Hello? I can see you." Marie heard Vernell tell him to put down the telephone. And then another child, perhaps a girl somewhat older than the boy, came on the line. "Hello? Hello? Who is this?" she said with authority. The boy began to cry, apparently because he did not want the girl to talk if he couldn't. "Don't touch it," the girl said. "Leave it alone." The boy cried louder and only stopped when Vernell came to the phone. "Yes," Vernell said. "Yes." Then she went off the line to calm the boy, who had again begun to cry. "Loretta," she said, "go get his bottle." "Well, look for it. What you got eyes for?" There seemed to be a second boy because Vernell told him to help Loretta look for the bottle. "He always losing things," Marie heard the second boy say. "She should tie everything to his arms." "Don't tell me what to do," Vernell said. "Just look for that damn bottle." "I don't lose nothing." "I don't," the first boy said. "You got snot in your nose." "Don't say that," Vernell said before she came back on the line. "I'm sorry," she said to Marie. "Who is this?" "Don't you dare touch it if you know what's good for you," she said. "I want to talk to Granddaddy," the first boy said. "Loretta, get me that bottle." Marie hung up. She washed her dinner dishes. She called Wilhelmina because she had not seen her all day, and Wilhelmina told her that she would be up later. The cassette tapes were on the coffee table beside the machine, and she began picking them up one by one. She read the labels: husband number 1, working; husband number 2, children, race relations, early DC experiences; husband number 3. She had not played another tape since the one about her mother's idea of Washington was like, but she could still hear the voice, her voice. Without reading its label, she put a tape in the machine. I never planned to live in Washington. Had no idea I would ever step one foot in this city. This white family my mother worked for, they had a son married and gone to live in Baltimore. He wanted a maid, somebody to take care of his children, so he wrote to his mother, and she asked my mother, and my mother asked me about going to live in Baltimore. Well, I was young. I guess I wanted to see the world, and Baltimore was as good a place to start as anywhere. This man sent me a train ticket, and I went off to Baltimore. Had never been kissed, had never been anything, but here I was going farther from home than my mother and father put together. Well, sir, the train stopped in Washington, and I thought I heard the conductor say we'll be stopping a bit there, so I got off. I knew I probably wouldn't see no more than at Union Station, but I wanted to be able to say I'd done that I stepped foot in the capital of the United States. I walked down to the end of the platform and looked around. Then I peeked into the station. Then I went in, and when I got back, the train and my suitcase was gone. Everything I had in the world on the way to Baltimore. I couldn't calm myself enough to listen to when the red cap said another train would be leaving for Baltimore. I was just that upset. I had a bunch of addresses of people we knew all the way from home up to Boston, and I used one precious nickel to call a woman I hadn't seen in years, 'cause I didn't have the white people in Baltimore number. This woman come and got me and took me to her place. I remember like it was yesterday that we got on the streetcar marked 13th and D Northeast. The more I rode, the more brighter things got. You ain't lived till you been on a streetcar. The further we went on that streetcar, dead down in the middle of the street, the more I knowed I could never go live in Baltimore. I knowed I could never live in a place that didn't have that streetcar and them clackety-clack tracks. She wrapped the tapes in 2 plastic bags and put them in the dresser drawer that contained all that was valuable to her: birth and death certificates, silver dollars, life insurance policies, pictures of her husbands and the children they had given each other, and the grandchildren those children had given her, and the great-grands whose names she had trouble remembering. She set the tapes in the back corner of the drawer, away from the things she needed to get her hands on regularly. She knew that however long she lived, she would not ever again listen to them, for in the end, despite all that was on the tapes, she could not stand the sound of her own voice. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do now. I guess usually people ask me questions. If people want to ask me questions, I'm willing to answer, however long you want to ask. Yes, sir.
What area in DC did you grow up in?
Mostly in Northwest. around the area of New Jersey and New York avenues. Because my mother, when she came from the South, she came to that area for the most part. And so when she got married and had kids, she was used to that area, and so we kind of remained around it. But as our kids got older, we moved further and further out. We moved eventually, the furthest we lived was like at 13th and Mass.
What high school did you go to? I mean,
Best in the city, Cardozo.
Tell them where you go,
Gonzaga?
Gonzaga's mentioned in one of the stories. The girl raised pigeons. Yes, sir.
When were you at the University of Virginia?
1979 to 1981 when I got my degree, and then I taught on for a year after that, and then I came back up here in 1983. I didn't have a car, and the job I had was in Arlington, so I got an apartment in Arlington, so it'd be an easy commute.
The stories have a certain sadness, they weigh a certain truth in the aspect of my own life, particularly around families and the personal, the real personal things that go on in families that you don't ever really hear about. It's sort of like an African-American experience from many different perspectives. I was just wondering how some of your stories develop, your characters, how do they come to you?
Essentially, you just kind of make it all up. If you have a particular example of one,
Particularly the two fathers, the story that you read about about the parents and how one father was writing to his son.
and a new man,
Father then
yeah.
related
Um,
to his daughter.
Yeah. When I first thought of the story, the old man didn't play very much of a part, but I think as the story developed, what I realized is that I needed something to kind of let the reader understand how Woodrow had gotten to be what he was, and so the more I wrote, the more I kept creating this old man until I had what you see now. But I think that's one of the stories where there are fathers who aren't very good. I think and that there are other stories where they're very good fathers, starting with the first story. Yes, ma'am.
Who would you like to read for pleasure?
Oh, ma'am. Can I go? I read in. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I read anybody who writes well. I don't want to give any names because the problem is that I'll end up forgetting somebody. But I will say that one of the first people I ever read was, the second book I ever read in my life was Native Son. And then I read Black Boy, and then I read Go Tell It on the Mountain, books like that. And then I went off from there, and I began, because most of the adults I knew were from the South, I developed a great liking for Southern writers. And I can remember reading Capote and Flannery O'Connor, because the weird thing is that even though these are white Southerners, for some reason they were writing about a world that I already knew about for some reason. And maybe it's just the way the white and black people interact in the South. But
Seems to me I read somewhere that you based these stories on Dubliners, Joyce's Dubliners.
yeah, when I think
Not on that, but you know.
no. What happened is that I think I read Dubliners when I was in college, and I was very impressed with what Joyce had done with Dublin. The thing about it is, you go away from Washington, and everybody in the world, the only thing they know about Washington is the Capitol and the Supreme Court and crap like that. And I think in the back of my head, I always knew that if I ever did, things about Washington, the last thing in the world I would write about was that kind of world that the rest of the world knew about. So when it came time, as things developed and began to think of the stories, I knew that one of the things I didn't want to do was do what they did with The Wiz. You have The Wizard of Oz, and then you do The Wiz, and it's the same story, only you just put black faces on the people. I wanted to create, a whole new set of people, and, it could be called Washingtonians, but it wouldn't be anything at all like Joyce's Dublin. Dubliners, because everybody will be different than people in his book. I didn't realize that I had been impressed with Joyce until someone asked me last year. But then I remembered reading it and enjoying it and liking what he had done.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to follow up on this. I think what he was saying is a good story about, I would almost say it's almost a dark edge, but there is a sadness about it. That I was looking at Lost in the City in particular,
Yeah.
the woman, she takes the cab. It's interesting, she meets the cab driver, and he seems like a father figure to her.
Yeah.
Almost, but she really wants some more drugs. She's got a lot of things to be upset about.
Yeah, well, I think if someone, the very first, when all of this began, the very first thing that ever happened, before the book came out, before newspapers interviewed me or radio, or before I ever did any reading, I was at a cable station in Alexandria someplace, and they hadn't read the book. All they had was this garbage that the publisher had sent them, and in it, I think the publisher said something about hopelessness in the stories, and I kept trying to tell the people that wasn't really what I saw in them. Because I think that there are a lot of stories in there where there's a great deal of hope. I mean, at the end of the store, for example, when you have this young man who's totally different from what he was in the beginning, and he gets on this bus and he travels all the way to the end of the city in order to get an education. And then the girl who raised pigeons, even though the tragedy of the pigeons and the birds and all of that, you have her at a point in her life where her father trusts her enough to travel about the city, because she's growing up enough, even at 12. There are other examples, but I think if you find a certain, sadness or darkness or whatever, it's because I don't write comedies. I tend to write tragedies, and that's my only defense.
Let's have one more question and then we'll open the wall up.
And what happens in the wall opens. the gods come down. Anyone else?
Are you working on something else now?
In my head, I'm working on something longer. But in the meantime, I finished a television script for the story, and they called The Store for Channel 26. And I suppose they'll put it on television if they get the money to produce it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I never know how it works out. It didn't go on too long, did it? Because I never read. You really can't tell behind the lights. I've never read 3 at one time.